Hey there. Tonight, we're not traveling back to medieval castles or ancient temples. There are no pharaohs, no knights, no gladiators, no crown jewels or Roman baths. No. Tonight, we're going to a place where the jungle breathes, where the ground is soft, but never safe, and where even your own lighter might betray you. It's 1969, and you're an American soldier in Vietnam. Congratulations. You've been drafted into one of the most confusing, humid, and dangerously creative chapters of military history. And just so you know, you won't be fighting ghosts, but you might be fighting doorknobs, toilet seats, and bags of rice. You see, this wasn't just a war of guns and grenades. This was a war of quiet traps, clever tricks, and the kind of psychological warfare that made a cockroach rustling in the bushes feel like incoming fire. But before we dive too deep into all that, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. No pressure. And hey, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to see who else is falling asleep to the same strange, slow stories. Now, go ahead and turn down the lights. Turn on the fan for that sweet little purring in the background. Maybe grab a blanket. And let's settle in for a gentle little journey through the world's most sleep-deprived battlefield. Shall we? Welcome to the jungle where even the rocks speak Vietnamese. You're in the jungle now, and not the cartoon kind with toucans and cheerful music. This jungle breathes. It sweats. It watches you. It's not the kind of place where you go to find yourself. It's the kind of place where, if you find anything, it's probably booby-trapped. You are a young American soldier, fresh off the plane, sweating in places you didn't know could sweat, carrying a rifle, 3 canteens, and about 5 layers of confusion. You've been told you're here to fight the enemy. But nobody mentioned that the enemy might be hiding inside a tree trunk, or disguised as a banana leaf, or waiting patiently inside the toilet. And no one, not even the most motivational sergeant, prepared you for the psychological effects of bamboo. Jungle logic. A lesson in humility. You quickly learn that Vietnam doesn't play by your rules. You see, back home, a bush is a bush. Here, a bush is a potential sniper, a wasp nest, or a very polite-looking landmine. You step over a log. It creaks. And for a moment, just 1 second, your entire nervous system has a meeting about mortality. Even the rocks here are suspicious. Some say the rocks speak Vietnamese, which isn't technically true. But when you trip over one and a grenade goes off nearby, you start to think maybe they're fluent. The enemy is everywhere. There's a saying among soldiers: if it moves, it's VC. If it doesn't move, it might still be VC at night. Every sound becomes a possibility. A cricket chirps, you flinch. A twig snaps. You check your rifle. A frog burps too loud. You start writing letters home. By the 3rd night in the jungle, your sense of humor is the only weapon you have that hasn't jammed yet. Psychological warfare. Courtesy of the forest. Let's talk about fear. Real fear. The kind that doesn't roar, it whispers. It rustles. It waits. American GIs quickly realized they weren't in a shootout. They were in a hide-and-seek championship, and they were losing. The Viet Cong had mastered the art of being nothing. They didn't need helicopters or tanks. They had patience and time and mud. They were in the trees, under the water, inside tunnels so narrow you'd have to exhale just to move forward. And then they'd vanish, like a humid ghost with a homemade grenade. Tunnels, a network of nightmares. Now, here's a fun fact to ruin your evening nap. There were over 120 miles of tunnels beneath Ku Chai alone. That's longer than most interstate highways in New England, but with more scorpions. These weren't just holes. They were homes, hospitals, arsenals, sometimes kitchens, and sometimes full-on meeting rooms, where battle plans were drawn while American soldiers tiptoed above them, wondering why the ground felt warm. Camouflage, no. The forest itself. You may have heard the term camouflage. The Viet Cong didn't use it. They were it. Their sandals were made from old tires. Their uniforms matched the dirt. They could hide under leaves and make it look accidental. American troops, on the other hand, arrived with bright patches, loud radios, and the kind of posture that said, "I'm not from here." The jungle noticed. The first trap is trust. What do you trust in the jungle? Your boots. They might trigger a pungy stick pit. Your buddy. He's just as scared as you. That can of peaches in your pack might be the last sweet thing you ever eat. And your senses. Oh no. Those are long gone. By day 3, your brain doesn't trust your eyes. By day 7, it doesn't trust your hands. By day 10, you're suspicious of your own shadow. And you should be. The last guy's shadow set off a tripwire. So, welcome to the jungle. Not the rock song, the real one. It's hot. It's quiet. It's watching. And this is just the beginning. We haven't even made it to the bathrooms yet. Next up, toilets that kill. A surprisingly explosive chapter in military history. But for now, take a breath. Relax your shoulders. Maybe sip some water. Clean water. From a bottle that you know isn't wired to a grenade. Because out here, even hydration could be suspicious. Where basic human dignity becomes a battlefield. Let's talk about something no one really wants to talk about. Something that doesn't usually make it into war documentaries or action movies. Let's talk about going to the bathroom. Because in Vietnam, relieving yourself wasn't just necessary, it was dangerous. And tonight, in this soft, quiet little tale, we'll explore one of the strangest fronts in the entire Vietnam War. The war for hygiene. The bathroom as a battlefield. Imagine this. You're tired. You're muddy. You've been patrolling through wet jungle for 14 hours. You just want one peaceful moment. And that's when you make a fatal mistake. You find a quiet little spot behind a tree, squat down with a sigh of relief, and boom. Literally. Boom. Because in this war, even going number 2 came with consequences. The Viet Cong understood something that few strategists ever considered. Wherever the enemy squats, they're vulnerable. Booby-trapped bathrooms. Vietnamese guerrillas, masters of terrain and timing, began rigging latrines, outhouses, and natural toilet spots with tripwires, mines, and even pressure plates. Some of these were so cleverly disguised that a soldier might never see the trap until, well, too late. Often, they were placed just under a thin patch of leaves, or wired beneath a slab of stone that doubled as a jungle toilet seat. And so began the most reluctant squat in military history. Toilet paper, the luxury of the damned. You may think toilet paper is a universal good, a human right, a comfort in a chaotic world, but in Vietnam, American soldiers learned something truly humbling. Your need to wipe could get you killed. The Viet Cong learned early on that American troops had one thing they couldn't live without: toilet paper. And where there was paper, there were patterns. GIs often carried military-issued TP, thin, stiff, and about as comfortable as wiping with a dried leaf from a cactus. Still, it was better than nothing. So soldiers carried their own supply, sometimes even guarded it, which is exactly what made it a perfect trap. The wipe and detonate device. Some of the cleverest traps were rigged inside toilet paper dispensers or even inside the rolls themselves. You reach for comfort. You pull the paper, and that's enough to trigger the pin on a hidden grenade tucked inside the hollow cardboard core. It's worth repeating: a grenade inside a toilet paper roll. Let that image lull you gently into insomnia. One soldier reportedly remarked, "We used to joke that if the enemy didn't kill you, dysentery would, but turns out the enemy was dysentery, armed." Tactical hygiene and the problem with clean freaks. The average American soldier arrived in Vietnam with more personal hygiene products than ammunition: soap, toothbrushes, baby powder, deodorant, wet wipes, and of course, American values. Clean is next to godliness, they said, which made them easy targets. The Viet Cong noticed this early. They saw how American soldiers obsessed over bathing, brushing, and generally not smelling like death and jungle rot. So naturally, they weaponized it. There are reports of traps set inside jungle bath stations where soldiers would hang their towels and rinse their faces in streams. A soap bar, freshly placed on a rock near a stream, seemed innocent, until someone picked it up, and underneath was a pressure-triggered mine. Sometimes the soap itself was fake, just molded clay coated in animal fat to look and feel real. The moment a soldier picked it up, it would tip the balance on a hair-triggered explosive. The message was clear. You came here to wash your sins. We came here to wash you away. Now let's talk about the most sacred object in a GI's pocket, the Zippo lighter. If dog tags were your name and boots were your feet, then a Zippo was your soul. But that soul could be explosive. A booby-trapped icon. American troops loved their Zippos. They engraved them with slogans like, "We the unwilling, led by the unqualified, are doing the impossible for the ungrateful." They lit cigarettes, letters from home, and sometimes the occasional field latrine fire, which made them another perfect target. The Viet Cong would recover Zippos from fallen soldiers, then restuff them with small charges and leave them behind. Later, an American would find one, flick it open, and in a flash of fire and irony lose a hand, a few fingers, or worse. Some men survived only because the lighter misfired. Others were less lucky. The emotional trap. There was something more insidious than just the explosion. It was the fact that the Zippo was personal. Losing a hand was one thing. Losing a memory, an engraved joke, a scribbled name, a silent prayer that was a different kind of wound, and the VC knew this. They didn't just want you dead. They wanted you unnerved, unmoored, unclean, uncertain. Even your lighter might be lying to you. Let's shift from toilets and lighters to something even softer, your clothes. Imagine this. You return from patrol. You're covered in mud, sweat, and about 12 species of bacteria. Your only dream clean clothes. Maybe even a fresh pair of socks. And that's when the next trap reveals itself. The shirt collar. Surprise. Vietnamese villagers often did laundry for American troops, sometimes paid, sometimes coerced, sometimes just trying to survive. But it didn't take long for the Viet Cong to co-opt the process. They began secretly working with or replacing local launderers. And then, they laced the inside seams of shirts, the folds of socks, even underwear, with itching powder. But not the prank store kind. This was military-grade stuff, derived from plants, engineered to cause burning rashes, swelling, and total distraction. Imagine trying to focus on an ambush while feeling like your armpits are on fire. Soldiers began to fear clean clothes. They sniffed their socks suspiciously. Some even refused laundry service altogether, choosing to wear the same shirt for weeks, which, frankly, did nothing to improve morale. But at least the rash was familiar. In war, sometimes trust becomes a luxury, and so does cotton. Now, while the average GI was suffering in the mud, officers had the rare pleasure of rooms. Not hotels, not comfort, but at least walls. So, of course, they were trapped too. In many officer lounges, there were small framed paintings hung slightly askew. Now, this was Vietnam, not the Louvre. So nobody expected perfect feng shui. But the human brain hates asymmetry. And many officers educated, refined, detail-oriented couldn't resist the urge. They'd walk up, straighten the frame, click. That motion pulled a line. The line triggered a pin. The pin dropped into a mine. Boom! All for the crime of mild OCD. A breath of fresh air and possibly death. You're a high-ranking officer. You've just had a long day of radio calls, logistics meetings, and pretending you understand maps. You step toward the window. Crack it open, just to feel the breeze, which was a mistake, because the handle was wired. The frame, booby-trapped. The outside, mined. You don't get fresh air in this war. You get a gentle reminder that even luxury has consequences. By the end of your first month in Vietnam, you're afraid of doorknobs. You don't trust your soap. You inspect your toilet paper like it's a bomb manual. And you start to wonder, maybe dirt isn't so bad after all. In a war where every basic need, food, water, fire, comfort might be weaponized, hygiene became a kind of high-risk gambling. And for many soldiers, the real horror wasn't the firefight. It was the 5 seconds before they sat down to pee. Next up, we'll explore the sad romance between soldiers and their Zippo lighters, how they became weapons, symbols, and in many ways, a diary of despair. But for now, settle back, breathe in, and be grateful that your toilet doesn't hate you. Lighters, laundry, and other ways to lose a hand, where personal belongings became deeply impersonal. Welcome back. By now, You've been in Vietnam long enough to lose trust in most of your five senses. You flinch at leaves. You talk softly to soap. You inspect every door frame as if it's judging you. And still, amid the discomfort, the sweat, the fear, and the 27 mosquito bites you got just by existing, there is one small thing that feels yours, a piece of home, a shiny little comfort you carry in your breast pocket, something that clicks open with pride, that lights your cigarette, your candle, and occasionally your enemy's villages. It is the Zippo lighter, and for many soldiers, it was their sixth sense. The Gospel of Zippo. Let's pause for a second and honor it. The Zippo wasn't just a lighter. It was the most reliable thing a soldier had. More consistent than their officers. More durable than their rations. And certainly more honest than the war itself. Made from brass or steel, windproof, simple, bold. Soldiers loved them so much, they engraved them, carved tiny messages into the sides like little poems of quiet despair. Things like "Heaven doesn't want me," and "Hell's afraid I'll take over," or "If I die, bury me face down, so the world can kiss my..." Well, you get the idea. Zippo as identity. These lighters became a kind of dog tag for the soul, a place where a soldier could express what he wasn't allowed to say out loud, the things too dark for letters home, too strange for therapy, too honest for command briefings. A tiny metal journal. That clicked. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a Vietnam story if that small moment of comfort didn't turn into existential terror. Because soon enough, the Viet Cong figured it out. They saw the love affair between Americans and their lighters. And they asked, what if we make it? Love with consequences. So began the age of the booby-trapped Zippo. The flick and the flash. The concept was simple. Take a discarded Zippo, load it with a small charge just enough to maim, maybe kill, close it, leave it where a soldier might find it, and wait. American GIs, driven by sentiment, would see one lying on the ground and think, "Hey, free Zippo." They'd flick it open, and instead of a flame, they'd find fireworks. Just not the 4th of July kind. Some lost fingers, some lost hands, some, ironically, had their hearts stopped by their own engraved thoughts. The mind game of memory. It wasn't just the physical injury that made these traps cruel. It was the mental sabotage. You see, Zippos had names, messages, dates. One soldier's lighter read, "I miss Mom's meatloaf," and someone else would pick it up, try to carry that memory forward, only to have it blow up in their face literally. The message became twisted. "You miss Mom's meatloaf. Now you miss your right hand, too." Cruel. Yes. Strategic. Also, yes. Because in this war, every object had the potential to lie to you. Even the ones that once loved you back. The laundry that fights back. If lighters betrayed the fingers, then laundry betrayed the skin. Let's talk about laundry in wartime. There's nothing particularly poetic about it. There are no odes written to socks or trousers. But for American soldiers in Vietnam, clean clothes were a quiet act of rebellion. I'm still human. they seemed to say. I still care about not smelling like a dying animal. And so, soldiers sent their clothes off to be washed. Sometimes by local villagers, sometimes by military services, and sometimes by the enemy in disguise. The Viet Cong, never ones to miss an opportunity, infiltrated laundry lines. They began lacing garments with a special substance. It looked like powder, felt like powder. But once you put it on, your body became an inferno of irritation. Derived from plants possibly related to poison sumac or urushiol, the powder caused intense itching, rashes, and inflammation. Suddenly, soldiers couldn't sit still, couldn't march, couldn't even think straight. There was no dignity in being taken out of combat because your underwear turned on you. Internalized paranoia. Soon, many GIs refused to send out their clothes. They wore the same shirt for weeks. Rotting boots became badges of loyalty. Some developed their own hygiene routines using ashes, urine, or even nothing at all, because it was better to stink than to itch, or worse, explode. Laundry baskets of doom. Not content with powder, the VC moved on to rigging actual laundry baskets. You'd lift a shirt, boom. You'd pick up a sock, snap. Some clever traps used tripwire tied between pants legs, hidden in the folds. Others used spring-loaded mechanisms built into the drawers of wooden footlockers. Once, a GI reported lifting his duffel bag only to hear the unmistakable click of a mine pin pulling. He froze. Sat there for 4 hours until EOD arrived and told him the mine was a broken rat trap. He cried anyway. Why it worked. These weren't just clever traps. They were psychological masterpieces because they violated the last safe space a soldier had his own personal items. The message was clear. Your stuff isn't safe. Nothing is safe. You are not safe. Not in the jungle. Not in your cot. Not even in your own pants. Doors, drawers, and deadly curiosity. Now, there's something uniquely human about wanting things to be straight. To fix the tilted picture. To open a drawer just to see what's inside. In Vietnam, that instinct could kill you. Fix it and die. One of the most quietly horrifying traps of the war involved crooked wall decorations. In officers' quarters, often slightly less grimy than standard barracks, small paintings or photos were hung, but just off-center. Some soldiers, unable to resist, reached up to adjust them. The picture was rigged. Wires hidden behind the frame ran to a small charge buried in the wall. One soft touch, and everything went dark. The lesson. Sometimes, imperfection is survival. Junk drawers of doom, footlockers and nightstands were also fair game. In some bases, the VC managed to sneak in and hide timed charges or impact mines inside personal storage. Soldiers returning from patrol would open a drawer to grab socks, letters, or ironically, a pack of cigarettes, and trigger a silent goodbye. The loss of little joys, beyond the danger, beyond the explosions and traps, was something perhaps worse. A slow erosion of joy, because every little thing you once trusted, your lighter, your shirt, your deodorant had become a threat. And when even your memories could detonate, what exactly was left to hold on? Let's go back to the lighter. You might be surprised to learn that thousands of these Zippos still exist today, found in collectors' shops, antique stores, or online auctions. Some are dented, some burned, all of them talkative. They tell stories not through flames, but through engravings. Messages like, if you can read this, thank your teacher. If you can read it in English, thank a soldier. Or, draft beer, not me. They're funny, sad, sarcastic, and in many cases, written by 19-year-olds who had seen more death than most old men. That's the strange truth about Vietnam. It was a war fought by kids, armed with lighters. So, if you're still with me, thanks for sticking around. Tonight, we've lit a small flame into one of the darker corners of the war, a place where laundry wasn't safe, lighters were explosive, and being clean could be a death sentence. You've survived this chapter, with all your fingers, hopefully, but we're not done yet. Next time, we'll look at how even food, yes, actual rice was rigged to ruin your day, and how opening the wrong door could send you straight to the next life. But for now, close your eyes, take a breath, and give your lighter a respectful nod. It just wants to help. Probably doors that kill, rice bags that explode, where knocking becomes survival and food becomes a fuse. We often say home is where you feel safe, but in Vietnam, safety was negotiable. You didn't just distrust the enemy. You distrusted the ground, the wind, your boots, and your doors, especially the doors. In this next chapter of our journey, we'll explore the simple, everyday act of entering a room and how, in wartime Vietnam, that too could kill you. Let's begin with something almost polite. Imagine walking up to a humble Vietnamese house in the countryside. You're on patrol, your rifle's slung, you're thirsty, and you're curious. You reach out, put your boot to the bamboo door and kick it open. That, right there, might have been your last decision. The welcome mat that explodes. Booby-trapped doors were simple, elegant, and cruel. A grenade pin tied to a door hinge. A bamboo spike mechanism behind the panel. Sometimes, even a trap set in the doormat activated by pressure or the loosening of weight. American soldiers often operated with a kind of assumed invincibility. Tall, strong, trained. They didn't knock. But Vietnam was not a place for pride. It was a place for precision and patience. And the Viet Cong had both. The art of the deadly entry. In Vietnam, even the idea of inside and outside was a trap. American soldiers, especially new ones, would walk into huts, outposts, or rural homes looking for signs of enemy activity. Instead, they found something far more unsettling, a false sense of security. Some homes were rigged from the ceiling down. A thin cord ran from the rafters to a bottle of gasoline, with a small explosive buried under the floorboards. Step inside, and the cord tugs. The bottle tips, the match lights. Suddenly, your warm, dry moment becomes fireworks, unwanted ones. Some soldiers called it the Spicy House Special. It was one of many reasons they began entering rooms like nervous cats. Rice bags. The hunger that bites back. Food. Let's talk about food. Because hunger, unlike war, is honest. It doesn't care what side you're on. It just wants to be filled. So naturally, it became a weapon too. The bag that bites. Bags of rice were everywhere in the countryside. Big, canvas things stacked in corners, leaning against walls, buried in supply caches. And for many American soldiers, they were like gold. Tradable. Useful. Comforting. Even. Until they started exploding. The Viet Cong quickly learned that rice made the perfect disguise. Bury a small charge at the bottom of a sack. Thread a fuse through the cloth. Weight it down with just enough real rice to make it believable. Now wait. A soldier lifts it, shifts it, or dares to open it. Boom. What was supposed to feed a family ends a life. Psychological warfare. Meal edition. It wasn't just the blast. It was the hesitation it created. Soldiers began to eye every pile of rice with suspicion. Was it real? Was it rigged? Even donated sacks from villagers were no longer trusted. What if the family was forced to deliver it under duress? Suddenly, eating became complicated. And survival meant knowing the difference between jasmine rice and C4. Spoiler. You can't. Not with the human eye. Bags, buckets, and the burden of curiosity. Sometimes it wasn't rice. Sometimes it was a bucket, or a metal drum, or a large jar of pickled something that looked kind of edible if you squinted hard enough. American soldiers, many just 18 or 19 years old, would poke around these mystery containers like curious toddlers at a garage sale. And sometimes that poke came with consequences. The weight trap. In one well-documented tactic, a bucket was rigged with a grenade suspended just below the rim. The grenade was held in place by tension wires attached to the lid. Lifting the lid pulled the pin, which turned snack time into nap time. Permanent nap time. The water jug gambit. Even water wasn't sacred. A canteen-sized jug, half full and slightly dusty, would be left at a former encampment. Inside a thin glass vial of acid and a fuse. Shake it the wrong way. Chemical reaction. Soldiers eventually developed a rule. If it looks too helpful, leave it. Which, frankly, is also good advice for used car shopping. The traps that sat still. Let's shift to something more stationary furniture. Yes, even chairs could be deadly. And before you say, well, I would never just sit down in a war zone. Let's remember that these were tired, overheated soldiers in 100-degree humidity. Sometimes, sitting wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Simple wooden stools were sometimes rigged with pressure plates so subtle you'd never know unless you had X-ray vision or a PhD in paranoia. You sit. Weight presses down. Trigger engages. Boom. In the jungles of Vietnam, comfort was not just scarce. It was suspicious. The bed frame dilemma. Some bunk beds, especially those abandoned in field camps, were loaded with small charges beneath the mattress springs. Imagine being so exhausted you collapse into sleep, only to wake up 0.5 seconds before oblivion. One soldier described it like this: I started dreaming before I even hit the pillow. And then I heard the click. He survived. But he never laid down the same way again. Some say he slept standing up for the rest of his tour. Some say he still does. The cost of constant vigilance. These traps weren't just about injury. They were about erosion. They wore you down, not with gunfire, but with decisions. Too many decisions. Do I sit here? Do I open that? Can I drink this? Is this door friendly? After a while, the mind folds in. You stop trusting your senses. You doubt your instincts. You begin to believe that everything around you is out to get you. Because, well, it is. The silent casualties. Plenty of soldiers survived the war physically. But something about always watching, always guessing, always hesitating that followed them home. Some could never relax again. Some flinched at slamming car doors. Some refused to touch certain foods. And some never entered their own homes without checking the doormat first. That's what these traps were. Not just instruments of pain, but little factories of trauma. Quiet, efficient, invisible. Closing the door, gently. So next time you open a door, without thinking, without fear, take a second to remember the strange little chapter of history where even that act, a simple twist of a doorknob, could be your last. Where lifting a rice bag was like playing Russian roulette with dinner. Where no part of daily life, eating, sitting, walking, was truly safe. That's the brilliance and brutality of the guerrilla war. It didn't just attack the body. It colonized the mind and left soldiers whispering to chairs. You've made it through another chapter, still in one piece, still not exploded. Congratulations. Next time, we'll explore the strangest traps of all, those made from animals, snakes, bees, and maybe monkeys with attitude. But for now, rest easy. You can open your fridge without consequences. Your bed won't betray you. And the only rice you need to worry about is whether it's undercooked. The sad science of poop and psychological warfare, where fear doesn't come from bullets but from bowel movements. We've talked about doors. We've talked about rice. We've even talked about exploding lighters and itchy underwear. But tonight, we descend even lower. Yes, all the way into the ground. Because if there's one battlefield where no one escapes, it's the bathroom. The trap beneath your feet. Let's say you're a young soldier, trekking through the jungle. Your boots are soaked. Your skin itches. You're tired. You're sweaty. And nature is calling. Now, jungle etiquette says, you dig a hole, just a small one. You drop your pants, do your business, and move on. Simple. Right. Except, in Vietnam, even that could get you killed. Booby-trapped latrines. The Viet Cong had a deep, almost poetic understanding of human nature. They knew where you'd go, what you'd need, and when you'd be distracted. So they turned that into opportunity. Sometimes, they'd bury grenades under pre-dug holes. Sometimes, they'd wire trip mines to tree roots nearby. Sometimes, they'd lace the area with punji stakes hidden beneath leaves. It got to the point where soldiers began saying, the jungle isn't trying to kill you, it's just waiting for you to squat. a very personal terror. There's something especially awful about the idea of dying on the toilet. It's vulnerable. It's undignified. It's human. And yet, in Vietnam, it was disturbingly common. One soldier recalled, "I heard a pop, and then screaming. We found him still sitting, legs blown clean through the dirt, still holding the roll." It wasn't funny, but it was so absurd. You didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so you did both. The stench of strategy. Let's talk about the smell. In most wars, it's gunpowder. In Vietnam, it was often something else, something more primal, more putrid, because the Viet Cong didn't just weaponize terrain. They weaponized waste. The excrement mine. Here's how it worked. You take a standard pitfall trap, let's say a bamboo hole lined with sharpened stakes. Now, instead of leaving the stakes clean, you dip them in human waste, sometimes animal dung, sometimes rot, sometimes a cocktail of unspeakable things. Why? Because a clean wound bleeds, a dirty wound festers. Soldiers who fell in didn't just get impaled, they got infected. Tetanus, gangrene, sepsis. Suddenly, a small puncture wasn't just painful, it was potentially fatal. One sergeant described it as death by stink, and that might be the most accurate combat diagnosis in military history. The fake minefield tactic. Now here's where things get brilliantly petty. Imagine you're a patrol leader. Your squad is marching single file, and you come upon a clearing covered in poop. Every few feet, another pile. Your instinct trap zone. So you stop, scan, debate, and then turn around. Congratulations. You've just been rerouted by excrement. Because sometimes that's all it was. Just poop. Nothing else. But you didn't know that. And that uncertainty, that was the trap. Weaponized disgust. There's a term in warfare, force multiplier. Usually it means artillery, reinforcements, air support. In Vietnam, it meant a well-placed pile of human feces because it delayed patrols, it redirected routes, it shook morale. Some soldiers would rather crawl through bramble and briar than risk stepping on what they feared was an explosive bowel movement. The battlefield wasn't just physical, it was psychological. And in that regard, the poop was winning. The dirty job of clearing dirty bombs. Let's say you're in the elite team known as EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. You're the brave and slightly deranged soul who crawls up to suspicious objects to decide if they're bombs. Now picture this. You're lying belly down, 3 feet from a brown, fly-covered object. Your gloves are slick with sweat. Your face is one sneeze away from disaster. And you have no idea if this pile of organic horror is just a pile or a trap. Do you dig it up? Do you poke it? Do you sniff it? One EOD operator wrote in his diary, "I've diffused claymores, tripwires, and mortars. Nothing haunts me more than the day I had to dismantle a pile of poop." Poop as decoy. It gets weirder. Sometimes the Viet Cong would place real mines beside a fake one. The fake obvious. visible, covered in poop. The real one, hidden, just 2 steps behind. So when soldiers moved carefully around the fake boom, it's the equivalent of a magician saying, "Look over here," while stealing your wallet with the other hand. Sanitation as sabotage. Let's talk about another angle. Hygiene sabotage. We covered earlier how soap, water, and clean clothes could be dangerous. But waste, that was its own dimension. American soldiers quickly learned not to trust local water sources. Many of them were contaminated intentionally or otherwise. A clear stream could lead to days of vomiting, fever, and dehydration. Worse, some water caches were rigged with bacteria or parasites.
You drink.
You suffer. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't cinematic, but it worked. The latrine whisper network. In some larger bases, there were actual built latrines, wooden structures with roofs and stalls. And even those weren't sacred. Some soldiers whispered stories of explosive seats, of traps hidden in plumbing, of snakes released through pipes. Whether true or not didn't matter, because the fear was real. And so, men avoided them, held it in, or risked the jungle instead. And the jungle was always watching. When fear becomes ritual, by the 2nd or 3rd month, soldiers developed routines. They picked safe trees, marked areas, traded tips on friendly dirt. Some even formed bathroom buddy systems. You watch. I wipe. It sounds absurd now. It sounded absurd then. But when squatting became a tactical decision, so did friendship. The quiet humiliation. Let's be honest. There's something uniquely humiliating about this kind of warfare. To be defeated not in battle, but in the bathroom. To fall not from bullets, but from a tripwire tied to a branch you never saw, in a place you thought was private, and yet, that's what made it powerful, because it reduced soldiers to their most basic selves, stripped of dignity, stripped of armor, just men, desperately hoping their next bowel movement wouldn't be their last. And that's the point. The purpose of war is not always to kill. Sometimes, it's just to break, to bend, to exhaust, to erode until nothing feels safe. The psychological toll of Vietnam wasn't just from firefights or napalm. It was from the endless, creeping paranoia. And in that war, a pile of poop could weigh more than a bomb. So tonight, as you settle into your bed, safe, dry, and hopefully unarmed beneath your sheets, spare a thought for the soldiers who flinched at leaves, who looked at toilet paper with suspicion, who carried hand grenades in one pocket and Pepto-Bismol in the other. They didn't fight monsters. They fought mud and mosquitoes and mines buried in the most unfortunate of places. And somehow, they made it home. Snakes, bees, and other freelance weapons. When the jungle itself joins the army, some weapons are forged in factories, molded in steel, tested by engineers, and labeled with serial numbers. Others come with scales, or wings, or fangs, and absolutely no allegiance to anyone. Tonight, we explore the forgotten front of the Vietnam War, one where the enemy didn't wear a uniform, didn't salute, and didn't care if you were communist, capitalist, or just trying to eat your lunch in peace. Welcome to the animal division, where snakes are tripwires, bees are aerial strikes, and the line between nature and murder gets very blurry. Snakes, the silent contractors. Let's start with snakes, because nothing says good morning quite like fangs to the face. Vietnam is home to more than 140 species of snakes, many of them venomous, some of them aggressive, and all of them perfectly happy to ruin your week. But the Viet Cong didn't just avoid them. They recruited them. The hanging snake trap. Picture this: a thin jungle path, dense trees, humidity at 90%. You're sweating through your uniform, eyes scanning for movement. You duck under a branch, and bam, fangs, right in the forehead. The trap was simple. Take a venomous snake, angry, hungry, unpaid. Tie it by the tail to a branch at just the right height. When an American patrol walks by and brushes that branch well, the snake handles the rest. No explosives, no ammo, just nature, outsourced. The death toll. While not all soldiers died from snake strikes, many were disabled temporarily or permanently. Swelling, blindness, shock, and, in the middle of a jungle, hours from evacuation. That's more than enough to take someone out of the fight. One medic described it as like watching nature say, "I'll take it from here." Snake in a hole. Another charming tactic. Place a snake inside a pit trap. Soldiers would be lured into false safe zones, cleared areas, or dugouts, and when they stepped in, not a spike, not a mine, a cobra, sometimes two. The message was clear. We don't even need metal to hurt you, and you know what they didn't. Bees air. Support from hell. Now, let's take to the skies, or at least the treetops. Because if you think guerrilla warfare couldn't get any weirder, Vietnam had weaponized bees. Introducing the Vespine Volunteers, specifically wasps, the nasty kind, the kind that can sting multiple times without dying, and often do. The local species commonly known as the giant hornet wasn't just large, it was aggressive, and territorial, and very, very responsive to sudden vibrations, which made them perfect for traps. How it worked. You find a large hive in the jungle, preferably up in the trees, surrounded by thick foliage. You attach a thin wire to the base of the hive. Run that wire through the undergrowth, across a narrow trail. Now, wait. A squad walks by. The lead soldier trips the wire. The hive shakes. The hornets wake up, and then buzz. Panic and pain. It's hard to explain how terrifying a cloud of wasps is when you're in the jungle. Wearing 40 pounds of gear, holding a gun, and breathing through fear. Soldiers dropped rifles, ran blindly into trees, sometimes into other traps. Some just curled up and prayed. And for the hornets, it was Tuesday. Animal-adjacent warfare. Not every creature was lethal. Some were just deeply inconvenient. Let's meet a few rats in tunnels. American tunnel rats, the soldiers who crawled into Viet Cong tunnel systems, faced unimaginable risks. Booby traps, collapsed ceilings, tripwires, but also rats. Lots of them. Starving, aggressive, and often infected. Sometimes the rats were just there. Other times, VC fighters would herd them into sealed sections. So when an American crawled in, he'd find himself nose to nose with 10 desperate rodents. No mines, no bullets, just squeaks and teeth, and a very long crawl backward. Chickens and the alarm system. In rural hamlets, chickens weren't food. They were motion detectors. The Viet Cong would keep chickens near trailheads or hidden entrances. Any movement, cluck, flap, panic. It wasn't lethal, but it let the guerrillas know exactly where you were. Basically the jungle version of a Ring camera, but louder. Why it worked. So why go to all this trouble, snakes? Bees, rats, chickens. What did these bring to the battlefield that a gun couldn't answer unpredictability? Because bullets have rules. Explosions make noise. But animals, they don't play by your logic. They sting at random, strike without warning, vanish into trees and shadows. And worst of all, you never know if one's waiting just behind that vine. Mental erosion. American soldiers became paranoid of the forest itself. They saw snakes in vines, heard buzzing in silence, flinched at every rustle. Even when there were no traps, the suspicion remained. And that's how you win a psychological war. Not with fire, but with doubt. The myth of the monkey soldiers. Now, we need to address something. At some point in the history of this very strange war, a rumor began spreading among American units that the Viet Cong were training monkeys to steal supplies, to throw grenades, to ambush patrols. There's no proof. None. And yet, the stories persisted. One soldier wrote, "I swear I saw a monkey take a Zippo off a dead guy and climb a tree. He lit a cigarette." I'm not joking. He was probably joking. Probably. When even nature hates you. Imagine this. You're 19. You're from Ohio. You joined the Army for a college fund and ended up 8,000 miles away. You're in a jungle. It's hot. It's loud. You're itchy. And you've just been stung by a hornet, bitten by a rat, and startled by a chicken. You haven't seen the enemy in days, but you're convinced the jungle itself is trying to murder you. Because, well, it kind of is. War by 10,000 cuts and stings. What these natural weapons lacked in explosiveness, they made up for in consistency. A gunfight ends. A trap springs once, but fear that lingers. You walk through the jungle with a sixth sense, not for direction, but for dread. And that is how they broke the spine of many a soldier's courage. Not with force, but with a steady whisper of danger. So tonight, as you pull your blanket up to your chin, know that you are not at war with bees, or snakes, or monkeys with Zippos. You are safe. Your doors won't explode. Your ceiling doesn't drip venom. Your bed probably isn't rigged, but once upon a time, on the other side of the world, in a place with too much green and not enough mercy, a soldier sat still, listened to a rustle behind him, and whispered, "Please, let that be the wind." It wasn't. The trap. You never escape after the war. The jungle goes quiet, but never really leaves. It's over now. The tour is finished. The boots are off. The rifle is clean and locked away. You've made it home. There are no mines beneath your floor. No bees in your closet. No snakes in the rafters. Just normal things. A couch. A kitchen. A bed that doesn't detonate. And yet you don't sleep. Because some traps don't need bamboo or bullets. Some are quieter, more polite, and infinitely more patient. Tonight, we explore the last and deepest trap of the Vietnam War, the one soldiers brought home with them. The war doesn't knock. It's the early 1970s. American soldiers are coming home in waves, some on stretchers, some whole, some not really sure which category they fit into. There are no parades, no champagne, just silence and questions. Where have you been? Why do you look like that? What happened over there? They don't know how to answer, not because they've forgotten, but because they remember too well. Re-entry. One day you're patrolling a jungle. The next, you're in a supermarket in Arizona, freaking out in aisle 6 because someone dropped a jar of pickles. You ducked. Your heart sprinted. And then you remembered you're not in Cu Chi anymore. But your brain hasn't caught up. Not yet. The face you wear in public. So you adapt. You get good at nodding, at saying I'm fine, at laughing at jokes you don't quite hear. You work a job, buy a house, go to church, coach a little league team. But part of you is still out there, checking doorknobs, avoiding tall grass, flinching at thunder. You don't talk about it because no one asks. Or they do, but not in a way that means anything. The mirror test. Sometimes you stare at your reflection and you don't recognize the eyes. They're older than your face, not tired, worn, like old boots or Zippos, or something that used to burn brightly and now just clicks over and over with no flame. The trap in the mind. This is the legacy of a war fought in whispers, where the enemy wasn't just a soldier. It was a branch, a chicken, a lighter. You learned not to trust anything, and that lesson stuck. Even when there are no mines, you still step lightly. Even when the room is safe, you still check under the bed. Even when the house is warm, you still sleep cold. The dream loop. Sleep doesn't come easy, and when it does, it comes with guests. You're back in the jungle. It's night. Something rustles. You raise your rifle, but it's just a bee. No, a trap. No, your daughter knocking on your door. You wake up gasping, alone, in a room that smells like soap and carpet, and still. You swear you hear buzzing. A war no one believed. One of the cruelest jokes of the Vietnam War was that the enemy wasn't just clever, they were invisible. And when American soldiers came home and told their stories, no one believed them. You're exaggerating. You say a snake was tied to a tree like a living tripwire. They laugh. You say your friend died reaching for toilet paper. They blink. You say you saw a tunnel smaller than your shoulders and went in anyway because someone had to. They change the subject. The loneliness of survival. So you stop talking, not because you're secretive, but because the silence is less exhausting. And soon, the story becomes like an unused Zippo, just something you carry. Heavy, metallic, quiet, until someone asks, "Did you serve?" And you say, "Yeah, for a bit. It was hot." What the traps took. The war took lives, but the traps took something stranger. They took your ability to relax, to trust, to not assume every object around you might end your life. You don't sit on chairs without checking them. You don't open drawers too fast. You don't eat rice without thinking, even years later. Relationships with caution signs. Marriages suffer. Kids learn to walk softly. Dogs don't bark in your house because they learned early that loud sounds are dangerous. And your spouse. They've heard you mumble in your sleep. Something about wires. Something about shadows. Something about a Zippo that wasn't yours. The lighter in the drawer. Many veterans kept their Zippo lighters. Some still flicked them open. Not to smoke. Just for the sound. Click, click, click. It's muscle memory. A small thing, but comforting. Because the lighter never lied. Not like the rest of the war. Some had words engraved. Messages like, "I'm already dead. When I die, bury me face down. Draft beer, not me." And some just said, "Home is a long walk." Finding sleep again. So, what do you do when the war is over, but you still check under your pillow? You try things. Medication, meditation, whiskey. Sometimes it helps. Mostly, it doesn't. But over time, something happens. You get older. The memories dull. Just a little. You learn the layout of your house by heart. You stop checking the bathroom twice. Eventually, you lie down and don't flinch at the ceiling fan. You hear a sound, and it doesn't raise your pulse. You even fall asleep, with the window open, just a little. That's the final trap. The one you live inside. It doesn't snap shut. It doesn't bleed. It just waits. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you learn to live with it. Like an old wound that aches when it rains. Like a lighter you still carry. Like a jungle that sometimes visits you in dreams, but doesn't stay. You survived. And survival, in this war, was never the end. It was just the start of coming home.